you had sort of I think you had a reputation or an image, I think, and you more than that, I think you just get categorized, right? You were a Democrat at the time, which I know you aren't anymore.
Time. Yep.
So what happened, man? What happened? Let's talk about that. So you left the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll just say, for as long as I've been in politics, people who like to put other humans in categories have always had trouble putting me in a category. Just because I've always been a very independent-minded person. So, I first ran for office in 2002 in Hawaii. I was 21 years old, very passionate about environmental issues and protecting the beauty of our home in Hawaii, the water, oceans, and that was my motivation to run for state house. And, prior to that point, I had no familial political affiliation. There was no my daddy and granddaddy were Democrats, so I have to be a Democrat. My parents were very hey, you go make your own decisions, figure out, what is your foundational principles. And so at that time, I really had to look, because I had to, file the piece of paper saying I'm running for office, and there was a box to check, okay, fine, what party are you going to run under? And so I started looking at kind of the origins in Hawaii, the Democratic Party. Hawaii had been under the rule of a few very wealthy Republicans since it became a territory of the United States, and then later through statehood. And the shift towards democratic politics in Hawaii came about because of plantation workers, people who were being treated like crap, in inhumane conditions, being paid pennies for working super long hours. It was basically glorified slave labor. And so it was the Democratic Party and the ILWU that came in and was no, this is not okay. And so it was the party that in our history in Hawaii was the big tent inclusive party. It was the party for the people. It was the party that stood up against those few very wealthy people in power and said, no, you can't just abuse people like this. It was the party that stood for civil liberties and individual freedom and choice. Hey, whatever your personal choice is, whether it's free speech or freedom of religion or whatever it is, live and let live. We can disagree without being disagreeable. And so I looked at the party in Hawaii, and I looked at leaders like JFK and Dr. Martin Luther King, and I was drawn to the Democratic Party for those reasons. Because again, as I looked at Hawaii, I was these super rich Republican dudes have been abusing their power to fill their pockets at the expense of the well-being of the people. And so fast forward, I left the Democrat Party because all of those things that I just talked about are gone. The leaders of today's Democratic Party don't believe in really freedom, basically what it comes down to. And you look at that freedom of choice, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and there's a lot of other issues that I could get into, but ultimately, how do you have a political party that's in power that doesn't believe in freedom and is actively taking action to undermine our Constitution and Bill of Rights? And that was really what was at the crux of why I left the Democrat Party.
Was there a straw that broke the camel's back?
There wasn't one single moment, but it was really over the last few years, 2-3 years, seeing this increasing, quickly escalating towards policies coming from our government that really, frankly, were becoming increasingly authoritarian. And so, it caused me to kind of spend time reflecting and being introspective, wait, hold on a second. And people saying how can you call yourself a Democrat? And I was obviously, like I said, I've always been an independent-minded person. I've been critical of people in power, whether they were Republicans or Democrats, and also complimentary when I felt like they did things that were good for the country. But looking at the dangerous combination of what we've seen over the last few years, especially of people in power who don't believe in the Constitution, who openly question things like the First Amendment and right to free speech, coupled with, oh, by the way, they control and are politicizing agencies like the Department of Justice and the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, sicking the newly formed domestic terror unit of the Department of Homeland Security on parents like protesting at Board of Education meetings because they're like, well, we don't agree with what you guys are trying to teach our young kids at school. And to see that playing out before our eyes, and this culture of fear where if you speak out against this stuff and call it for what it is, you are immediately labeled anti-authority, and also therefore coming from our government, an extremist and a potential threat, a potential domestic threat. And so that's why you're talking about the Overton window, and you look at like, okay, well, you take people having open minds and like, okay, well, I can consider, you know, someone else's perspective, even if I don't agree with it, which is how things should be in general. And then you take it to that next level where you're saying, well, there are no guardrails anymore. And this is what's so dangerous is when you have, again, people are entitled to their own opinions, but when you have people in positions of power in this country who deny the existence of objective truth as they are, then where's the floor? Where's the guardrails? Where's the ceiling? How do you measure anything? Well, it's like, okay, well, whatever's true is whatever they say is true. But then what happens when they're gone and the next person or group of people come in, or the next party, and then what if they don't agree with what that group says is true or false? And so and then you couple that with the fear factor and cancel culture and people literally seeing what happens to people like me, where you just say like, hey, well, this is what's happening, and it's crazy, it's insane, and then I get called all kinds of names and all kinds of stuff, all kinds of attacks. And so no wonder so many people are afraid to do the equivalent of like, yeah, obviously the emperor has no clothes. Like, we can all see it. And there's a lot of concern about what's happening, but so few people feel like they have the ability to speak up without being worried about losing their job, or being shunned by friends or family members, or being like that crazy person. And so this is kind of one thing that's been interesting and hope inspiring is, you know, I put out this kind of long and in-depth statement talking about some of these very specific examples of what's wrong with today's Democrat Party. And I've been hearing from a lot of people I know, a lot of people I don't know, in person, on social media, people just saying like in a really serious and heavy kind of way, thank you for bringing voice to the things that I've been feeling and been frustrated with, but you know, haven't been able to give voice to. And so my hope is that, you know, the more we speak up, the more people feel as though they can speak up. And how do we protect people? How do we protect our freedoms that are under attack? By exercising them.